Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The intellectual crucible for Gabriel García Márquez was forged in the pervasive, often surreal violence that saturated mid-20th century Colombia. The period known as La Violencia, a brutal undeclared civil war, presented a profound narrative crisis. The established traditions of European literary realism, with their emphasis on objective description and psychological plausibility, felt wholly inadequate to capture a reality where the grotesque had become commonplace and the absurd was a daily occurrence. The dispassionate, fact-based prose of conventional journalism likewise failed to convey the subjective terror and the deep, mythic undercurrents shaping the lived experience of the populace. It was within this chasm, between what could be officially reported and what was viscerally felt, that a young journalist began the work of inventing a new language, a new way of seeing, and ultimately a new realism for a continent. His early career at the Bogotá newspaper El Espectador became his essential laboratory. This was an apprenticeship in perception, a period where he honed the meticulous observational skills of a reporter while wrestling with the expressive limitations of the form. He learned to anchor his narratives in a bedrock of verifiable detail, a technique that would lend immense power to his later, more fantastical creations. The most illuminating example from this period is his 1955 series of articles, later published as the book The Story of a Shipwrecked Sailor. On its surface, the work is a straightforward piece of investigative journalism recounting the ordeal of Luis Alejandro Velasco, a sailor who survived 10 days adrift on the Caribbean Sea. Yet, García Márquez transforms this raw material into something far more complex. He structures the account with the rising tension of a psychological thriller, focusing on the minute details of Velasco's struggle against thirst, hunger, and madness. The narrative is gripping because of its scrupulous fidelity to fact. The true genius of the work, however, lies in its ultimate revelation. The sailor's ordeal was the consequence of an overloaded naval destroyer carrying contraband goods, a fact the military dictatorship had strenuously suppressed. By presenting this exposé through the lens of a heroic survival tale, García Márquez crafted a powerful piece of political critique disguised as an adventure story. He demonstrated that the most potent truths could be delivered through a narrative that prioritized human experience over dry reportage, fusing journalistic integrity with literary artistry. This emerging style was profoundly shaped by his deep engagement with the masters of literary modernism. From the American novelist William Faulkner, he absorbed a crucial structural idea: the creation of a self-contained, mythologized literary territory. Faulkner's Patriarch County, a fictional Mississippi county populated by recurring families and haunted by its own intricate history of glory and decay, provided a direct blueprint to the world García Márquez would later call Macondo. Faulkner showed him that a small, seemingly insignificant region could serve as a microcosm for universal human dramas and national historical trajectories. This concept of building a complete world with its own geography, genealogy, and folklore empowered him to move beyond individual stories and toward the creation of a comprehensive epic vision. Equally formative was the influence of the Prague-born writer Franz Kafka. From Kafka, particularly from his novella The Metamorphosis, García Márquez learned a vital lesson in narrative tone. Kafka's power derives from his narrator's calm, almost bureaucratic presentation of a fantastic event. Gregor Samsa awakens as a monstrous insect, and the story proceeds with a chillingly objective normality, focusing on the practical and familial consequences of this impossible transformation. García Márquez seized upon this technique of presenting the marvelous with a deadpan, impassive face. He understood that if a narrator reports a woman ascending to heaven with the same factual tone used to describe the weather, the reader is compelled to accept the event as part of the story's reality. This flattening of the ontological hierarchy, where the magical and the mundane are given equal narrative weight, would become the central technical pillar of his mature style. He was learning to wield a reporter's objectivity as a tool for making the incredible feel undeniable. These journalistic and literary influences began to coalesce in his early short fiction, which served as proving grounds for his new aesthetic. The 1962 collection Big Mama's Funeral, particularly its title story, marks a significant step in this synthesis. The story chronicles the death and impossibly elaborate funeral of a local matriarch who is the absolute sovereign of a fictional domain. García Márquez employs a language of epic hyperbole, treating this local event as a matter of global and even cosmic significance. The narrative is filled with an exhaustive, almost legalistic inventory of Big Mama's immense, intangible power and possessions. Her death necessitates the presence of the Pope and the President, and her funeral becomes a carnivalesque spectacle that exhausts the nation. Through this grand, mythic framework, He delivers a sharp critique of the decaying feudal power structures and the oligarchic families who had long dominated the Colombian coast. He uses exaggeration and legend to expose the very real, almost supernatural, hold these figures had on the collective imagination. Here, the meticulous detail of the journalist merges with the myth-making ambition of the epic poet. The story demonstrates his growing confidence in using a fantastic lens to achieve a more profound and incisive form of social commentary. In these foundational years, García Márquez assembled the essential components of his literary revolution. From his work as a reporter, he acquired a profound respect for the power of concrete detail and a commitment to grounding his narratives in a recognizable reality. From Faulkner, he took the architectural vision of a self-contained fictional world, a stage grand enough for a national epic. From Kafka, he mastered the crucial technique of the impassive voice, a narrative posture that could domesticate the miraculous. His early stories were the workshops where he experimented with combining these elements, learning to use hyperbole, myth, and a dead tone to explore the complex political and cultural realities of his homeland. He had developed a method for narrating a world where history itself felt like a fever dream. The next logical step was to apply this method on a grander scale to construct from these pieces the definitive foundational myth of his invented world, a project that would seek to codify the very soul of the continent's memory. With his foundational tools assembled and refined, Gabriel García Márquez stood before a monumental intellectual challenge. He sought to forge a definitive, epic narrative for a continent whose past seemed to resist the linear, progressive chronicles favored by European historiography. The problem was how to represent a history defined by bewildering cycles of prosperity and ruin, by incessant civil war, by the deep scars of foreign exploitation, and by a pervasive, almost willful, collective amnesia. The solution he devised was a literary act of creation on a biblical scale, a project that would give this history a home, a name, and a form. This project was the construction of Macondo, and its operating system was a formal codification of magical realism. The result, 100 Years of Solitude, presented Macondo as a complete narrative laboratory. This fictional town functioned as a perfect microcosm of the Latin American experience, a self-contained universe where the entire arc of the continent's history, from its mythic genesis to its prophesied apocalypse, could be enacted. The primary technical achievement of the novel is its rigorous application of the unique narrative posture. This method involves a deliberate flattening of ontological perspective, a kind of narrative democracy where the miraculous and the mundane are granted equal weight. Events that defy physics, like the ascension of Remedio's beauty into the heavens, are recounted with the same dispassionate, journalistic precision as verifiable historical occurrences like the arrival of the railroad. This technique gives the fantastic a powerful sense of inevitability and truth. The novel's famous opening sentence is a masterclass in this method. It reads, many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Orly Arnold Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. This single statement is a marvel of structural engineering. It employs prolepsis, a forward leap in time, to immediately place the reader within a fatalistic historical loop. The life of the character is framed by its end, suggesting that destiny is inescapable. Furthermore, it fuses the epic with the intimate. The historical weight of a firing squad is juxtaposed with the personal, wondrous memory of discovering ice, an object treated by the inhabitants of Macondo as a miraculous invention. From the very first line, history, memory, myth, and technology coexist on a single, seamless narrative plane. This structural enactment of cyclical time is reinforced by the Buendia family's bewildering naming conventions. The endless succession of Orly Arnauds and Jose Arcadios, each inheriting the core traits of his namesake, serves as a genetic and narrative engine for the theme of repetition. The Orly Arnauds are solitary, intellectual, and drawn to war, while the Jose Arcadios are impulsive, physically powerful, and prone to tragic ends. Their recurring fates illustrate the novel's core argument that without a conscious break from the past, history is doomed to repeat itself, first as grand tragedy, and then as a recurring, almost farcical, family drama. Within this framework, García Márquez deploys specific episodes that function as powerful allegories for broader historical and psychological phenomena. The insomnia plague that sweeps through Macondo is a profound metaphor for the loss of collective memory. As the villagers lose the ability to sleep, they begin to forget the names of things and the purpose of objects. To combat this erasure, they label everything, from the cow to the town clock, in a desperate attempt to cling to reality. This sequence dramatizes the struggle of a culture to preserve its identity against the encroaching void of amnesia, a condition central to the political experience of many Latin American nations, where official histories often erased inconvenient truths. The novel's political and moral core resides in its handling of the Banana Massacre. This section marks the violent intrusion of external, corporate history into the mythic bubble of Macondo. The arrival of the American Trout Company initiates a period of false modernity, which culminates in a strike by the plantation workers. The government, acting on behalf of foreign interests, responds by machine gunning thousands of strikers and secretly dumping their bodies into the sea. The true horror in Garcia Marquez's telling is what happens next. The state completely denies the event ever occurred. The official record is wiped clean, and the massacre is relegated to the realm of subversive fantasy. The lone survivor, Jose Arcadio Segundo, is treated as a madman for insisting on the truth. Here, magical realism is inverted. The fantastic event is the historical atrocity itself, and the realism is the chillingly plausible act of its official erasure. The narrative technique validates the people's memory over the state's sanctioned history. The intellectual lineage for this grand synthesis is both rich and specific. The architectural vision for a self-contained world, a literary comedy that could serve as a stage for a national saga, was inherited from William Faulkner and his creation of Yacht and Patriarch, a deeper philosophical architecture, one that treated time as a nonlinear labyrinth and reality as a textual construct, came from the metaphysical fictions of his Argentine contemporary, Jorge Luis Borges. The final scene of the novel, where the last Orly Arno deciphers the Sanskrit parchments that contain the entire history of his family and discovers he is reading the story of his own life as it happens, is a concept of pure Borgesian elegance. The epic sweep and the tone of breathless wonder, however, derived from a more personal source of the chivalric romances and fantastical tales, like Amadis of Gaul, that his grandmother had narrated to him with a perfectly straight face in his childhood. Through 100 years of solitude, Garcia Marquez accomplished something profound. He created a shared myth, a foundational text that gave literary form to a continent's complex identity. He codified a narrative language that was uniquely suited to its subject, a language capable of holding superstition, violence, love, and history within the same sentence. The novel became a mirror in which Latin America could see the beautiful, terrible, and fantastical truth of its own story. Having constructed a sweeping, mythic epic of the collective, his next intellectual pursuit would involve a dramatic shift in focus. He would turn his lens from the sprawling family saga to the claustrophobic inner world of absolute power, dissecting the anatomy of the solitary figures who had so often shaped the continent's tragic destiny. Through 100 years of solitude, Garcia Marquez accomplished something profound. He created a shared myth, a foundational text that gave literary form to a continent's complex identity. He codified a narrative language that was uniquely suited to its subject, a language capable of holding superstition, violence, love, and history within the same sentence. The novel became a mirror in which Latin America could see the beautiful, terrible, and fantastical truth of its own story. Having constructed the sweeping, mythic epic of the collective, his next intellectual pursuit would involve a dramatic shift in focus. He would turn his lens from the sprawling family saga to the claustrophobic inner world of absolute power, dissecting the anatomy of the solitary figures who had so often shaped the continent's tragic destiny. This venture placed him squarely within a hallowed and difficult Latin American literary tradition, the novela del dictador, or novel of the dictator. For decades, writers had grappled with how to represent the figure of the credullo, the strawman whose persona consumes the state. Precursors like Eligio Carpentier in The Kingdom of This World and Miguel Angel Estrellas in El Senor President had exploited the surreal and brutal nature of autocratic rule. Garcia Marquez, however, perceived a deeper narrative problem left unsolved. He sought to move beyond an external depiction of the tyrant's actions and instead to inhabit the very consciousness of power itself, to map the labyrinth of a mind that has known no limits for a century. The challenge was to write from inside the pathology, to create a literary form that could embody the suffocating omnipresence and profound solitude of the absolute ruler. His solution, arriving in 1975, was The Autumn of the Patriarch, a work of astonishing formal audacity. The novel abandons conventional narrative structure entirely. In its place, Garcia Marquez constructs a torrential, breathless prose composed of colossal, unpunctuated sentences that stretch for pages. These sentences are voiced by a fluid, unidentified collective narrator, a polyphonic weave that seems to represent the entire nation. This weave speaks for the palace functionaries, the soldiers, the market women, and the anonymous citizens, their voices all blending into a single, overwhelming stream of consciousness. This technique achieves something remarkable. It dissolves the boundary between the dictator's internal monologue and the collective voice of his people. The reader is submerged in a world where it is impossible to tell where the patriarch's paranoid thoughts end and the public's fearful whispers begin. The syntax itself becomes a metaphor for the political reality. The endless, winding sentences mirror the decaying, labyrinthine corridors of the presidential palace and the inescapable nature of a power that permeates every corner of existence. The experience of reading the novel is intentionally claustrophobic and disorienting, forcing the reader to feel the psychological weight of a society fused to its oppressor. The work was a profound evolution of his craft, where 100 Years of Solitude used a clear, declarative tone to make the fantastic seem real. The Autumn of the Patriarch used a baroque, convoluted style to make the real feel like a fever dream. The novel's immediate impact was to solidify Garcia Marquez's status as a leading modernist innovator, willing to dismantle the architecture of the novel to serve his thematic aims. While some readers found its dense prose difficult, critics recognized it as a masterful solution to the problem of representing totalitarianism. He had crafted a literary language for decay, a grammar for the solitude of absolute power. Following this deep dive into the mind of the tyrant, his intellectual focus shifted once more. He turned from the singular pathology of the dictator to the collective psychology of the society that allows such figures to thrive. The new problem was one of social complicity. How does an entire community become a passive accomplice to a foreseeable tragedy? This question led into a completely different narrative methodology, culminating in the 1981 masterpiece, Chronicle of a Death Foretold. Here, he abandoned the mythic and the surreal for the meticulous precision of a forensic investigation. The novel presents itself as a work of journalism, an attempt by the narrator to reconstruct the events of a murder that occurred 27 years earlier. The book's famous opening line announces the victim and the outcome, immediately stripping the story of conventional suspense. The narrative tension derives from a different source entirely, from the agonizing question of why the murder, which was publicly denounced and known to almost everyone in the town, was allowed to happen. The technique is a brilliant fusion of journalistic inquiry and literary artifice. The narrator gathers fragmented testimonies, conflicting memories, and disparate accounts from the townspeople, piecing together a mosaic of collective inaction. Each person had a piece of the puzzle, a reason to believe the threat was a bluff, or an assumption that someone else would intervene. This structure serves as a literary model for the sociological concept of the diffusion of responsibility. Garcia Marquez performs a narrative autopsy on the conscience of a community, revealing how a web of minor hesitations, social codes, and individual passivity can produce a catastrophic failure. The book is a stark examination of how honor, machismo, and a collective unwillingness to get involved can conspire to create an unstoppable tragedy. The influence of this approach was immense. Chronicle of a Death Foretold provided a powerful template for what would later be termed literary nonfiction. It demonstrated how the tools of fiction, foreshadowing, characterization, and carefully structured narrative could be used to explore real-world social and psychological phenomena with a depth unavailable to pure journalism. He had invented a new way to write about communal guilt, framing a story of social failure as a gripping, literary mystery where the culprit is everyone and no one. In this period of his work, Garcia Marquez moved from mythmaker to diagnostician. He first anatomized the isolated mind of the patriarch, creating a language to articulate the rod of absolute power. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, he dissected the social body, exposing the subtle mechanisms of complicity that enable violence, and then explored the grand, dark pathologies of political and social life. His gaze would turn again, this time toward an equally powerful and enduring force. He would move from the public square to the private heart, investigating the resilience of love across the vast, unforgiving expanse of time, and memory. Having anatomized the pathologies of power and the anatomy of collective guilt, Garcia Marquez turned his formidable intellect inward, away from the body politic, and toward the private, enduring human heart. The intellectual challenge he set for himself was immense: to chart the course of love over a lifetime, a subject saturated with sentimentality and literary cliché, and to render it with the same rigorous, unsentimental precision he applied to dictators and massacres. The question was how to document a half-century of romantic devotion as a form of historical inquiry, transforming a love story into an archive of human endurance. His solution, a masterpiece of his later career, was Love in the Time of Cholera. The novel represents a profound methodological pivot. Here, he grounds the soaring ideals of romance in the unyielding, often grotesque, realities of the flesh. The central narrative follows Florentino Ariza's unwavering love for Ferminer Darzer, a passion that persists for 51 years, 9 months, and 4 days. This epic weight is treated with the meticulousness of a scientific observation. His approach is one of clinical realism, juxtaposing the sublime language of poetry and love letters with detailed accounts of aging, bodily decay, and the relentless progression of disease. The genius of the method lies in its central metaphor, equating the symptoms of lovesickness with the symptoms of cholera. Florentino's youthful passion manifests with violent physical distress, green vomit, and a weak pulse, leading a doctor to diagnose him with a dreaded plague. This parallel serves a crucial purpose. It strips love of its ethereal quality and embeds it within the material, biological world. Love, in this framework, becomes a physiological condition, a chronic ailment as real and as ravaging as any epidemic sweeping the Caribbean coast. The novel's title is a declaration of its method. The cholera epidemics provide more than a backdrop. They are the historical and biological clock against which the characters' lives are measured. The public fear, the quarantine flights, and the medical theories of the era become inseparable from the private drama of the lovers. García Márquez researched the history of 19th century cholera outbreaks with the diligence of a historian, ensuring the details of public health measures and the progression of the disease were accurate. This historical scaffolding gives the romance its weight and its truthfulness. The story of Florentino and Firminer unfolds alongside the story of their city's struggle against a recurring, invisible enemy. Their personal endurance is mirrored by their community's resilience. Furthermore, the economic modernization of the region, particularly the development of steamboat travel on the Magdalena River, provides another concrete timeline. The rise and fall of the riverboat company for which Florentino works charts the passage of decades, marking time with changes in technology and commerce. The final, iconic journey of the aged lovers on a steamboat flying the yellow collar flag becomes the ultimate fusion of these themes. They achieve a state of grace and isolation by embracing the very symbol of disease and death that has haunted their entire lives, transforming a public health crisis into a private sanctuary. The genesis of this profound investigation into love and time was deeply personal, stemming directly from the courtship of his own parents. The story of his father, a telegraph operator and violinist who wooed his mother against her family's wishes, provided the verifiable biographical skeleton for Florentino's long pursuit. García Márquez approached his own family history as a primary source document, interviewing his parents to gather the specific details, anecdotes, and emotional textures that would give the novel its powerful verisimilitude. This act of familial archaeology demonstrates his belief that the grandest narratives are built from the most intimate and specific human experiences. This method of treating memory and personal history as material for rigorous investigation found its nonfiction expression in his memoir, Living to Tell the Tale. In this work, he applies the same lens to his own life. He approaches his own memories with a degree of skepticism, viewing them as raw materials that have been shaped and reshaped by time and emotion. He examines his past with the eye of a detective, searching for the core events that forged his consciousness and his literary sensibility. The memoir is a masterclass in his technique, showing how life story can be constructed as a compelling narrative while simultaneously exploring the very nature of memory itself. For him, the truth of a life was located in the way it was remembered and recounted. The impact of this approach, treating a love story as a medical and historical case study, prefigured later intellectual movements, particularly the rise of narrative medicine. This field, which emphasizes the importance of patient stories in understanding illness and healing, echoes García Márquez's core insight. He demonstrated that the subjective experience of love, aging, and memory could be explored with a depth and seriousness typically reserved for political or social analysis. He created a literary language for geriatric romance, one that celebrates the persistence of desire and affection into old age without flinching from the physical indignities that accompany it. He showed that a story about two elderly people finding love could be as epic and as historically significant as a story about the founding of a nation. Having dissected the private heart with the same care he once reserved for the public square, García Márquez had completed another crucial phase of his intellectual project. He had demonstrated that the most personal human experiences, love and memory, were inseparable from the broader currents of history, technology, and even epidemiology. He had developed a method for writing about endurance, grounding the most profound emotions in the solid, verifiable facts of a specific time and place. This deep dive into the archive of the human heart was a final piece of preparation he needed before articulating the grand, unified theory of storytelling that would become his ultimate legacy. Having dissected the private heart with the same care he once reserved for the public square, García Márquez had completed another crucial phase of his intellectual project. He had demonstrated that the most personal human experiences, love and memory, were inseparable from the broader currents of history, technology, and even epidemiology. He had developed a method for writing about endurance, grounding the most profound emotions in the solid, verifiable facts of a specific time and place. This deep dive into the archive of the human heart was a final piece of preparation he needed before articulating the grand, unified theory of storytelling that would become his ultimate legacy. This meticulously crafted method, a fusion of empirical observation and imaginative synthesis, required a home. It needed an institution to ensure its principles could be transmitted, debated, and refined by a new generation. His life's work culminated in the creation of the Fundación de Nuevo Periodismo Iberoamericano, the foundation for new Iberoamerican journalism in Cartagena in 1995. This was the ultimate expression of his belief that journalism and literature spring from the same source. The foundation addressed a persistent intellectual problem confronting storytellers throughout the global South: how to craft narratives that were both faithful to verifiable events and true to the complex, often surreal, lived realities of their societies. The standard model of detached, objective reporting, imported from North American and European newsrooms, frequently failed to capture the essential truth of a place where myth, rumor, and collective memory were potent social and political forces. It could report a general's decree with perfect accuracy while missing entirely the popular belief in a prophecy that would ultimately seal the general's fate. The Foundation's pedagogy was the codification of his life's work. It proposed a radical yet rigorous solution. It taught aspiring journalists to see the world through a double lens, insisting that the most profound realism must embrace the seemingly magical elements of human experience. Superstition, folklore, and shared delusions were treated as critical data points, social facts as tangible and influential as economic statistics or political speeches. He championed workshops where reporters learned to employ the tools of the novelist, using scene construction, character development, and narrative pacing to reveal a deeper truth than a simple inverted pyramid of facts ever could. He encouraged them to investigate the story behind the story, to understand that a rumor about a ghost haunting a government building might reveal more about public trust and historical trauma than any official press release. This was his unified field theory of narrative, a method that armed journalists to document the world in its full, bewildering complexity. The power of this narrative epistemology radiated far beyond the lecture halls of Cartagena, becoming a foundational method for a new generation of international writers. Its influence is profoundly visible in the work of Salman Rushdie, particularly in his 1981 masterpiece, Midnight's Children. Rushdie takes the core principle of Garcia Marquez's method, the fusion of personal destiny with national history, and applies it to the tumultuous birth of modern India and Pakistan. The protagonist, Salim Sinai, is born at the exact moment of India's independence, and his life is telepathically linked to the lives of all other children born in that first hour. This central conceit is a direct inheritance of the Machiavellian model, where the fantastical serves as a powerful metaphor for exploring the sprawling, chaotic, and mythic forces shaping a new nation. The magic is the mechanism that allows the narrative to contain the immense contradictions and aspirations of a subcontinent. A similarly direct lineage can be traced to the work of Isabel Allende. Her celebrated novel, The House of the Spirits, reads as a direct application and adaptation of the narrative architecture pioneered in 100 Years of Solitude. Allende constructs a multi-generational family saga, following the Truber family, whose personal fortunes and tragedies mirror the political upheavals of 20th century Chile. The character of Clara the Clairvoyant, with her telekinetic abilities and communion with spirits, provides the magical element that, as in Macondo, serves to illuminate the unspoken truths and historical undercurrents of her society. Allende demonstrated the portability and power of the method, showing how its framework could be lifted from the Colombian Caribbean and masterfully applied to the Andean political landscape, proving its universal utility for dissecting the interplay between the personal and the political. Both Rushdie and Allende inherited more than a style. They inherited a sophisticated intellectual toolkit for narrating the post-colonial experience. In the final analysis, the 1982 Nobel Prize in Literature awarded to Gabriel García Márquez was for something far more fundamental than a collection of extraordinary novels. It was a recognition of his role in furnishing 20th century literature and journalism with a new narrative epistemology, a powerful and flexible way of knowing and telling the truth about the world. He bequeathed to future generations a rigorous and humane method for documenting the complex realities that flourish at the intersection of history, power, and myth. His legacy is the understanding that the most fantastical stories can be the most truthful, for they give voice to the beliefs that shape human action. In our own era, an age saturated with contested information and competing claims on reality, this method of seeking truth within the rich, messy, and often contradictory tapestry of human experience remains a vital and profoundly necessary guide. He taught us that to truly understand a society, one must listen to its official histories and its whispered ghost stories with equal attention.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.